Welcome back to another episode of Noisy Neighbors. My name is Kit Russell, and I'm your host. And I wanted to just thank everyone for taking the time to listen to us. On this episode, we sat down with Justin Pogue. Justin was actually on episode 6 of our live episode that we did in San Francisco at the Balanced Breakfast Summit. What we decided to do today was to have Justin join us because we thought it was really interesting of his background of working with artists, but he actually comes from a very unique, different industry. He's a real estate consultant and also a financial advisor. And he had a few different ideas and points in the previous episode about how to kind of save money on your rent so that you can spend more on your actual art. And so I decided to invite him back so that we can dig a little bit more into that, talk a little bit about his book called Rental Secrets, and also more importantly, how you can actually negotiate your rent.
My name's Justin Pogue, and I've been working in the real estate industry since 2003 as a property manager and real estate developer. And while that wasn't initially what I had planned to do, it's been a really rewarding profession and a career to have. And it's really been about creating housing for people and walking people through the process of renting properties, and so they can helping them choose the property that's right for them. But most recently, I've taken that experience and I've focused it more on transitioning into a writer, speaking, authorship kind of role, and that led me to write my new book, Rental Secrets. And it's really about strategies that people can use to either reduce their rent or get better value for what they're paying. And, having strategies to do that can support you in whatever endeavor you're focused on, whether it's music or whether it's some other creative endeavor. It's just everybody's looking for how do I make my life better with the resources that I have? And that's kind of the secret hack that everybody's looking for.
So how did you, it's kind of like the story. You said this wasn't initially what you kind of set out to do. How did you fall into that? I think that's always kind of an interesting path.
So in 2002, I left grad school, I was getting an MBA, and my original plan was to go into management consulting.
Okay.
But at the time, tech bubble was bursting, and a lot of companies were deciding what their new business model was going to be. And basically, thanks, new guy, but we don't really need you to figure out what our new plan is going to be. So we're not hiring. And it really wasn't just me. It was a situation where people had already signed offer letters, bought houses near the offices where they were going to work, and got rescission letters from consulting companies, saying thanks, but no thanks. And the nice ones actually gave, 2 or 3 months severance, but that was it. So it was really kind of, at the time, an implosion was basically going on in that particular industry. And then it's really interesting because when that situation happens, that's not what you're expecting when you come out of school after you invested all of this time and money in redesigning your career. But then it also, highlights the importance of developing resilience and figuring out, okay, that didn't work, transitioning to that next step. And for me, that next step was real estate.
Yeah. It's interesting how you cannot have things initially planned out, and then you have to kind of figure out how to adapt, because markets can change quickly.
Yeah, but it's the same thing too. Like if an artist goes to a gig and the stage isn't set up the way they thought it was going to be, or somebody who they thought was going to be there ended up being sick that day or whatever, you have to adapt to that because there's a crowd of people who are expecting you to perform when you get there. So you just kind of got to figure it out. You try and keep that to a minimum as much as possible, but it's not always you can't always do that because you don't necessarily know what you're going to be dealing with.
Yeah, that's true. So tell us a little bit about Rental Secrets and kind of what led you to writing that book.
Well, as of towards the end of 2017, I had a position where I was managing 200 plus apartments spread between Mountain View, Campbell, and Santa Clara in California. And when I left that position, I kind of went through this soul searching period where I was deciding what I really wanted to do next and how I wanted to apply my background. And that led me to the concept of possibly writing a book, because what books help you do is help establish your credibility in a particular industry or field. So I was thinking I would kind of shift into a kind of real estate consulting role where I might help property management companies or individual investors, invest in real estate. So you go to Barnes and Noble and you look at what's available in the space where you want to write. And I saw that the vast majority of books that were out there were written for property owners, property managers, and real estate investors. Nothing was written really from the standpoint of the renter and how does the renter navigate this process and what value is the renter bringing to this endeavor. And most people say, well, the renters, they're there to pay rent, which is a big part of the value that they bring. But there's other value that they're bringing. There's other problems that they can help landlords solve that provide value. And that's really what the book kind of focuses in on is, yeah, they pay rent, but renters are also doing other things for landlords as well. And those other things have value. And then in the book, that also leads to the next step where if renters recognize that they're bringing other levels of value to this interaction, then they can use that in order to negotiate the rent that they're paying and possibly pay a little bit less, and save some money and be able to kind of accomplish more with what they have.
Gotcha. So what is the value that they bring other than just paying rent? And that's really when I was reading over your site, I'm like, okay, I need to figure out what that is because that's a whole nother thing no one's even thinking about.
Yeah. So let's start with what the actual product is that the renter is buying. As a renter, you're buying two things. You're buying space and you're buying time. If either of those two things are missing, there's zero value from what the landlord is providing. So if I tell you I'm going to let you rent this space for 2 weeks starting next week, that has value to you. It's useful. If I tell you I'm going to let you rent this space for 2 weeks starting a month ago, that has zero value to you. In fact, the sentence doesn't even make sense. So the time component is really the basis of what we're talking about here. So what the landlord is looking for is not only the amount of rent, but also the continuity of that rent. So their cash flows continue over time. That's the other component that I think a lot of people don't consider. So let's take an example of you're renting an apartment. Your landlord comes to you with a renewal offer and they want to raise your rent $200. Well, if your rent is say $4,000, which is not unheard of in the Bay Area, and you decide, well, I don't really want to accept your offer, I'm going to move out. Well, what happens from the landlord standpoint? The landlord is going to lose at least a week of time in order to get that apartment ready for someone else. And since, as we've already talked about, there's a time space component to the value of this apartment, they're losing $1,000, which is a fourth of that $1,000 monthly rent, of the $4,000 in monthly rent. And that's assuming that you have somebody lined up to move in right at the end of that week, which you probably don't. So that 1,000 can turn into 2,000, can turn into 3,000. And that's what the landlord is losing. On top of that, they've also got to pay people to come in and clean, fix things up, do repairs, and all of that stuff. So there's a cost to you deciding to move out that the landlord's going to have to pay. And you're in charge of deciding whether they have to pay that or not. They're not in charge of that. So getting back to this renewal offer, you're interested in raising my rent $200. Well, let's renegotiate that because I know there are costs that are pretty significant that you're going to have to pay if I decide to move out. So let's talk about a $50 increase. You avoid all of those costs, and I get to keep $150 a month in my pocket. Which boils down to I can invest, I can take that money and invest it, I can cover car payments, I can do a lot of other things with that money.
Yeah, seriously, you can easily repurpose that to whatever you need it for. And then especially nowadays where rent in cities is crazy because everyone wants to live in these small pockets of places where things are happening. So it sounds like it's just a simple thing of like, hey, now the knowledge of what the expenses are for the building owner and what you can do to actually use that to negotiate things down very simply.
So what we kind of just went over was just one source of power that people who are renting have. Another source of power we can talk about is the competition for quality renters is really intense. And I know you've probably seen outside new apartment complexes, they have the person waving the sign to attract attention for people to come in and move in. So in the advertising industry, those are called human directionals. I really don't like that term, but that's the term for it. Yeah. But anyway, that person is out there because they're trying to get renters to come into their property versus some other property. So as a renter, how you can use that is you're looking at whatever properties are appropriate for you based on where your job is and so forth. That's how you're determining which properties you want to look at. The landlord is determining, what they're going to price their properties at based on what other communities within a mile or two of where they are pricing their properties. And what they're trying to sell is their location because they can't change it. The building is where it is. That's it. So that property that you're now living at might be a half hour east of your job, let's say. But there might be other communities, a half job, that you would consider viable. So now knowing that, you can go to your landlord and say, well, this is what you're offering me. These are the viable alternatives that I have. Also a half hour from my job. This is what they're offering me. And now you're negotiating using actual market information. And just the fact that you as a resident went and got that information and are presenting it is rare enough. But then the fact that there may be differences in those prices is now makes your case even more compelling. And it's information that the landlord doesn't have. The landlord is not taking time to do the research of where do you work, what is within a half hour radius of that, and analyzing those different properties as compared to where you're living to come up with what they call, to come up with a price that is competitive with the market. Mm-hmm. They're defining their market as a very small area, which is a mile or two around their location.
Yeah, I had a question. So, what are some things artists or anyone renting should look at when vetting a space, and should they be aware of like subletters, or what are other things that they should take in consideration when picking spaces to rent, either whether it's a creative workspace or a living space?
So I'm gonna kind of pull that question apart because there's actually multiple questions in there. So when an individual person is going to look at an apartment, you are looking for the actual price that they're charging for the apartment, what specials or deals they might be offering at any given time. You're looking at what does the curb appeal of the property look like? When you drive up, to the property, does it look like the picture you saw online? If it doesn't, run. Because this whole thing is based on trust. And if you're not being forthright and forthcoming with the picture online, then what else aren't you being forthcoming about? Also, you're looking for any signs that the property is not being maintained well. So is there paint flaking off the walls? Is there do the balconies look like they're being maintained? Those kinds of questions. And since most of these tours happen on the weekend, there are likely going to be people who live in the complex there while you're taking the tour. Stop and talk to them. Ask them questions. They know how the property works. They know how management operates. They know fixed or not. They know, there might be a laundry room there, but they know that 5 of the 6 machines are broken most of the year. They have those kinds of insights. And the other thing, while you're having that conversation, keep an eye on the leasing person who's showing you around. They start looking a little antsy, they start looking concerned, then it may be a sign that they don't have the best relationship with the resident that you're talking to. So I would point out those are kind of the signs that I would be looking at if I was going to a property to rent something. Now, your question about subletting, where you may be walking into a situation, you may be walking into a roommate situation, or you may be walking into a situation where you're subletting from someone else. Typically, in terms of subletting, the landlords would prefer not to sublet if they don't have to. They would prefer that new person to actually just sign a new lease if they can qualify. But in the case that you can't qualify, they may want to put you on the lease with the other person, so that they have a lease with both of you on it, to hold both of you responsible in case things don't get paid. So that's something to keep in mind. And one thing when people are subletting, sometimes people just move in, which actually is typically a violation of the lease, which could lead to eviction and some other problems as far as who gets the security deposit back and some other issues later on. So it's really better to be upfront with the landlord about what's happening and who's doing what, so that everybody's on the same page.
So I was also just curious too, about people that might be interested in entering real estate. I think that's something that it could be a viable. One of the things we usually talk about with any creative artist or whoever's trying to build their brand is that have something that's versatile, that they can have obviously multiple streams of income and multiple ways that they can earn money and repurpose it. So is there any kind of advice for anyone that might be like, hey, I may not have the means to even start to look and exploring into real estate? I think that might be something that you give advice on. So how can people start to even enter the market for that, especially nowadays?
So are you talking about entering real estate as as in terms of buying your own home, or in terms of investing, or becoming a real estate agent?
Probably investing.
Okay.
Investing, owning your own home, or yeah.
So from an investment standpoint, there are multiple types of real estate that you can invest in. There's industrial real estate, commercial real estate, office space, but most people start with residential because that's what they're most familiar with. One of the really great strategies to get started in real estate investing is to, when you buy a property, you buy a duplex. So it's a 2-unit property. You live in one, which solves the problem of I'm paying rent, I'm not gaining any equity. So now you have a home that you're living in, and then you're renting the other side of the property to someone else. So you can start that rental process and start investing. You're investing in an area that you live, so you know the area very well. You can keep an eye on your rental property because it's right next door. Makes it easy to have a transparent relationship with your tenant because they're your neighbor. And since you actually live in the property, you can qualify for owner occupied financing. So your interest rate will be lower because you live on the property. Because banks look at, well, if you don't live on the property, it's a riskier loan for them. Because if you live there, you're more invested on multiple levels. So what that does for you is with owner occupied financing, means your monthly payment is going to be lower. So it's a way to invest with lower cost and more peace of mind, more security, access to the property, more access to the resident. So that's a good way. That can be a really good way to start as a real estate investor. Another way people are starting out as real estate investors is instead of buying a duplex, they'll actually buy one residence, and then they'll rent rooms within the residence to people. The advantage of that is purchasing one unit is less expensive than purchasing a duplex. You still can qualify for the owner financing, and you don't really have to put as much into it. You take a bedroom, put in some furniture, and go ahead and rent it. The downside is you don't have that privacy. You don't have that separation between you, where you're living, and where the resident is living. So it's kind of more of a shared space situation going on in that example. But for people who are initially starting out, it makes investing easier because you're there, you're familiar with the area, you're familiar with the tenants. It's easy to check up on things, and you have that peace of mind. Because really investing kind of gets back to what is your tolerance for risk? How much risk do you want to take on? Well, starting out, people don't really understand what all the risks are, so they want to take as little risk as possible. And having your rental property close to you in an area that you know makes it easier to manage that risk level because it's a lot lower.
Gotcha. So this kind of leads into another question too, and I think this really relates to just kind of the arts communities and people within cities. Is that places that are for the arts are often getting lost in the shuffle, getting taken back from developers that want to open up more apartments that aren't used. Places are getting shut down. I think a lot of cities deal with that, where there's less places to perform and less places for creativity.
Mm-hmm.
I guess kind of it's a mission of kind of reclaiming ownership of those spaces. And that's probably a longer, deeper conversation. But I was curious about your thoughts on that. Is that probably different in some ways? Because I'm guessing that's a little bit more commercial real estate in that sense. But what's kind of your thoughts on that?
So one thing I definitely say is that the arts can be used to attract attention to whatever that developer's project is going to be. So while that particular building that was there that people were using, it may be difficult to retain that, but you may also be able to work with the developer to include some type of space like that in what they're doing. Just like, for example, when developers come in, they want to add schools, and the community wants them to add schools and parks and that kind of thing. The community can also ask if we set aside some part of this for creative space, because that's part of the fabric of this particular neighborhood, and that will help attract those residents that are living in this neighborhood to stay and actually to live in the community that you're trying to develop. So it's not necessarily the developers want to come in and change the entire makeup of a particular community per se. That's not always their goal. But the purpose of development is enhancing that community. So if you can take what the community already has and incorporate it into what you're doing, then you can get from the developer standpoint, I can get buy-in from the community that's already there, which makes it easier for me to actually move forward on my project. And developers are sensitive to getting through the development process, which is already long, as quickly as they can. And community support helps a lot with that process. Because if you think about it from a real estate developer standpoint, I've bought this land. I've got a construction process that's a year or two long. I don't make any money on this until I get to the end of that and get a certificate of occupancy. Until I get that, I've got a big hole in the ground or a big paperweight that I can't do anything with. So it's really like for those communities to like harness the power of getting community support together for that project. And in exchange for that support, we're looking for XYZ. Is that something that you can incorporate into what you're doing and have that conversation early in the process, and pay attention to what's going on down at the permit office. And I know it sounds really boring, but that permit office is a wealth of information about what developers are doing in a particular area. And it's all public information. You just have to go and ask. And the people in that permit office, they're sitting there waiting for the public to come and ask them questions. Because they want that interaction. But typically they're not getting it because most people are not hanging out at the permit office.
Yeah. So it's interesting. It's like a lot of what you're talking about, from reducing your rent and also trying to build harmonious relationships between the arts and developers, is about being aware of the information that's available and then acting on it. Because it's out there. And like you said, people are at these permit offices ready to have these conversations, because no one wants everything to just be commercial buildings, apartments and things like that. They want it to be a thriving world. And I think that's just kind of a misconception there. So
yeah, no, absolutely. And the arts and the creative vibe that artists bring actually can be actually be a marketing tool for communities. I mean, that's one of the things that that the head of Balanced Breakfast, Stefan, was trying to do with the hotel that he was working at. By bringing in musicians and bringing in artists, he can set up that particular hotel. The brand of that hotel can be set apart from the other hotels that are available. Oh, this hotel has live music, and not only live music, but these local artists. So I'll be able to hear something that I've never heard before. Those kinds of things, it sounds like it wouldn't be so impactful, but it really is, because it crafts the experience that people have when they go into these properties.
Yeah. And that makes a valid point too, because that could be something that is just a whole nother line of business for artists.
Yeah.
They can be like, hey, I can perform here. This apartment building, this coffee shop or whatever is going to pay me X amount of dollars to show up and do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's even opportunity.
Right. Something else that I came across in my networking was a lot of real estate development now is also for like senior care facilities, where they're taking care of older people and that kind of thing in their later years. And what they're looking at is, what can we do around music therapy to help people retain their cognitive abilities. So they may have artists come in and play, live versions of music that these people would have listened to in their teenage years or early 20s or in their 30s to help them with their mental therapy and maintaining their mental faculties. So there's a lot of different ways that musicians can participate and enhance the development that's going on around them. Like specifically let's put it this way. So if you think about New York, Manhattan, 300 years ago, it's all 1-story, 2-story buildings, basically suburbia. Over the past 300 years, it shifted from that to what we see today. That same process is what's happening in a lot of other metropolitan cities. Things are becoming denser. Those 1 and 2-story creative spaces now need to be 5 and 6 and 7 stories. But the idea would be for the community to use their influence to talk about, can we carve out in that building that you're building, because things have to get more dense, can we carve out a space within that to continue the creative vibe that a particular community may have?
That makes sense. Yeah. So I just want to kind of switch back to negotiating and pick your brain about that a little bit. I think I like what you mentioned about finding ways to position the value that you have as a renter. But I'm also curious about just negotiating and of having those conversations with a landlord or anyone, because I think that's really important for um, artists as well that are trying to negotiate any type of deals that they're having in any type of way. And most people aren't anyway trained in that. And so I'm curious about just what do you think are the basics of negotiating that people should practice, keep in mind, just like basic one-on-one.
Okay, definitely. The first thing is you need to be talking to someone who can actually negotiate with you. So from a renting standpoint, most major companies that own properties, they'll have a leasing agent there. The leasing agent likely is not the person who can negotiate that rental amount. They're going to have to take that information to someone else and get approval for what you want to do. Which is not necessarily a bad thing. You just need to know that that's the situation that you're in. Whereas if you're dealing with a smaller community that might be run by an owner who by a landlord who's also the owner of the property, you're immediately talking to somebody who can negotiate. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is keying in on the motivations of the person on the other side. What pressures are they under? What problems are they trying to solve? And because once you know that, then you can focus on, well, this is what I can do to solve your problem. And that's the conversation. That's the point where real negotiation is happening. And you get down to this kind of fair exchange. And thirdly, like bring information to bear. Like earlier, I was talking about getting information from other communities that might have been on the other side of the job that you work. You're bringing actual real information into the situation that this person doesn't have. And the reason why they don't have it, even though they're experts in their field and all of that, is because they're defining their market differently than you're defining the market. You're defining the market as whatever fits my needs. They're defining the market as who's located right around me, and I'm comparing myself to them. So negotiating with the right person, getting information and bringing it to bear, and understanding what their actual problems are and how you can solve them, that's the basis for any great negotiation.
Yeah. So, what's the process to go start doing that market research, and what tools do you typically use when doing market research like that?
Yeah. So that's a great question. Craigslist is a fantastic gold mine of information. Now, all of the information you find on Craigslist is not necessarily going to be accurate, but it's a great place to start having those conversations, because from Craigslist you'll start getting some pricing information. You'll get some location information, and most importantly, you'll get phone numbers. So you can actually call, verify the ads, see if this person is legitimate, see if what they're presenting is see if what they're presenting is truly what you saw online, or if it's something else. That's where you start getting that. That's where you start getting that information from. And it may also require a visit to those other properties to really see, if they measure up. Because the idea is to locate places that you would truly consider living at. This is not really about, well, I found this, shack that somebody wants to rent that's not even really a residence, and they priced it, at half price. And so you want to make sure that when you're negotiating good faith and you're being authentic. And that you're presenting real information.
You mentioned that what helps in a negotiation is knowing and being keyed into the landlord or the renter or common concerns. What are some common concerns that you typically see when that help you out in a negotiation?
So common concerns that the landlord has.
Yeah, that prospective renters can take advantage of to help when they're negotiating.
Okay. So from a landlord perspective, what I'm looking for a quality tenant. So a quality tenant is defined as someone who has the means to pay whatever rent that we've agreed upon, on a regular basis for the term of our lease, what we've agreed upon. One. Number two, I'm looking for someone who has a quality credit history, meaning they don't owe money to other apartment complexes. They don't owe a bunch of money to, like, on their cell phone bill or their cable bill. It's just an idea of how responsible they are. Now, speaking of credit, there are a couple of exceptions. So people's credit that has been dinged by medical bills and issues, as a landlord, I'm not really concerned about that. Now, this is my opinion. Other landlords have a difference of opinion, but I'm not really concerned if you got hit with a bunch of medical bills and that you're still trying to work out how to pay those. That really doesn't give me an indication of how responsible you are. Because when you compare a cable bill to a medical bill, you chose to have a cable bill. You didn't choose to have the medical bills. I mean, it's not like you were getting plastic surgery or something like that. So I really kind of discount that. And I also discount anything left over from major financial issues, like what happened in 2008. If you've got something in your credit that stemmed from that, that's not your fault. So those things I really discount. But in terms of credit, I'm looking for a history of responsibility. Then after that, I'm also looking for not only a history of financial responsibility, but also a history of social responsibility. When you get into an apartment, are you going to create a bunch of noise that's going to drive other residents away? Do you clean up after your pet? Do you do you park in the space that is assigned to you, or are you parking all over the place causing problems for other residents? Now, all of that type of information is not necessarily going to be immediately available when you're having that conversation with the renter. To get that kind of information, you can talk to either the community they lived in previously, or, and this is actually more importantly, the community they lived in before that. because the community they lived in most recently might just be trying to get rid of them, so they'll tell you anything. The one that they were at before that, they have no stake in this at all. The person's already gone. They can be a little more open and flexible with the information that they're sharing. And it also comes down to what is the general impression or vibe that you get from this person. Do they seem responsible? Do they respond quickly when you ask for information? Did they come with the information already prepared when they came on the tour? Those kinds of things can give a landlord some peace of mind about the quality of the person they might be renting to. Also, once you rent to someone, don't just rent the apartment and they live in there and you don't go and inspect the apartment for the next 3 years. Most companies, every 6 months, they'll do a fall inspection and a spring inspection. So they'll actually go into the apartment, look for damage, issues, and it's a good time to touch base with the residents too. But those kinds of things is so you do that kinds of things so you basically you trust that this person is handling your property in the right way, but then you actually go in and verify periodically to see if things are going the way you expect them to go.
Cool, that's really helpful. So I think you've kind of covered everything that we kind of initially wanted to go over with you. What I'm curious about now is just for you, what's next for you and Rental Secrets? Where, is there something that you're working on kind of coming up down the pipeline that people can expect, or anything that you want to plug in?
Yeah. So the website for the book is rentalsecrets.net. That's where I'm posting events and developments with the book. I've had the opportunity to be quoted as an expert in some articles and that kind of thing. So I'll be posting up those media links on that website as well. And then actually tomorrow I have a live event in San Jose where I'm kind of discussing the book and I'm sharing that with some other people, and really walking through not only my background and some of the secrets in the book, but how those secrets can be used to help affect people's personal financial strategies and what they're working on. Because the hope is not just about saving money, which by itself is good, but how you use those resources once you created them is what that next step is. And that's kind of what the live presentation will go into. In addition to that, I'm out networking with people, talking to people about different ways they might be able to use the book for their whatever their profession is. So for example, if I'm talking to a realtor, I may talk to them about partnering on a first-time home buyer seminar. If I'm talking to someone from a corporation, especially if they're in HR, I might talk to them about, well, are you having trouble retaining your employees because of the high cost of housing in the area? Let's talk about how my book might be able to help you with that. So it's those kinds of opportunities and networking opportunities that I'm continuing to get involved in as we go forward.
Cool. All right, Justin. Well, thank you for your time today. This was a good call. I think this was very helpful for us to, even just as entrepreneurs, let alone creatives. And I think a lot of this will be very helpful for everyone that's going to be listening.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, Justin. Yeah. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, since we're kind of focused on the creative space, like, the more money you save, the more gigs you can go to, the more music you can record, and the sooner you can ditch your survival job and move into really what you really want to be doing.
Yeah. And I think you simplified everything too, because it's like something of negotiating a rent or dealing with real estate just seems so complex to people before they even take the time to understand it and realize that you just need to equip yourself with the knowledge first.
Yeah. I mean, it boils down to everybody's got problems,
Mm-hmm.
and value comes from helping people solve their problems.
find this episode insightful, helpful in any way, or inspiring, please invite one other friend. That's all we ask, is just one other friend to listen in and join the Noisy Neighbors community so that we can continue to spread this word and also to build the community around it. Thank you.